Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Bella Tanzer. Bella's been on our podcast before discussing her introduction to German course. Today she's wearing her other hat, and that is as a counsellor specialising in marriage. Now, I know you specialise in marriage, but you also help individuals with mental health problems. Um, do you think there's a stigma around mental health in the church?
I think that's a big question. I would say yes and no. I think originally yes, but I think a lot has changed, and every church is different. So I can only speak about some tendencies that I see in the global church. I've lived in different countries over the last 20 years, and just seeing how different church congregations just deal with mental health. And I'm thinking about depression, I'm thinking about personality disorders, I'm also thinking about neurodiversity, which is becoming bigger in the church as well. I think we're a lot more aware of autism, we're a lot more aware of ADHD. I like to call it vast. I think ADHD is quite a labeling word. So I think vast varied attention stimulus trait is the is the word I like to use. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I think the church is becoming more aware of it. And I was preparing for our time together, Emma, I was thinking, there are churches who ignore it, who have this tendency of saying, okay, if I ignore it, it's going to go away,
Mhm.
which I think is a real problem because it can lead to members in the congregation thinking, oh, I must be the only person
Mhm.
who is struggling with this. And I think what that leads to is we put up a facade. We start acting. So I don't know, let's say I'm depressed, but when I go to church, I put on my happy face, for example. Or let's say I have a child with MAST that really struggles. And then I I don't tell anybody about it because I want everybody to think that I'm a great parent. So my child needs to sit still, even if it's really struggling. So I think that is one approach, and I think, as you can imagine, I think that's a really dangerous way of
Yeah.
dealing with mental health because it puts up, it it forces people into living a facade.
Mhm.
The second way, which I think is also not very helpful, is talking about mental health, but from a we and they perspective. So having this idea of, we're okay because we have Jesus. And Jesus, don't get me wrong, has changed just being his child and being loved by him and understanding things in my life has been really healing. So faith is a huge resource. Um, but I do think that I know a lot of people who struggle with mental health and who dearly love Jesus,
Mhm.
who've had some adverse childhood experiences, or sometimes there's a genetic factor there. And this is the lived reality
Mhm.
that 1 in 5, and that's probably on the lower end of the speculations. I think it's a lot more of people in the church struggle with mental health. So
Yeah.
if we have a we and they perspective, again, that makes people feel I'm not okay. I need to put up a
Mhm.
facade. I need to pretend I'm perfect. I need to pretend I'm somebody different.
Mhm.
I think it doesn't actually, people, if people are not authentic within the church, that's going to leak out in
Mhm.
various ways.
Yeah.
So I think that is really problematic. What I'm hoping, and that is my vision for the church, and that's also part of what I'm hoping to create with um, the Flow Collective. So we used to be called Flow Counselling, but really the vision is much bigger now, much wider now, and the vision is to make mental health issues visible, but also to say, actually, marriage is something that we really need to care about. What's happening in our relationships? How can we support couples and individuals to have good mental health and to enjoy their relationships with God and with people? So, what my vision would be that we can be honest with what's happening in our lives, and at the same time that we can be in that space between not yet, we're not yet there, we're not yet in heaven yet, things aren't perfect yet, and we are really struggling with the realities of life sometimes. But on the other hand, believing that, or learning to believe that God is a good God who has good intentions for us, even if we don't experience it in the present moment. And that's where I would love to see churches. And I think our church in this area, so I go to a church in Edinburgh, and yesterday we had somebody do a talk on mental health, and And the person just shared about her experience with mental health issues in the church and what it was like for her.
Mhm.
And I thought that was like a refreshing wind, hearing, you know, somebody saying, I struggle with depression and this is my lived reality. I know God is there, but I don't always feel it.
Mhm.
And this really helps me. These things really help me. And then the person said, and other things really don't help me. So could you please stop doing them? So I think starting to have conversations around mental health and saying, yes, this is our lived reality. And we still believe God is good and that God is with us in our battles. And that's also, that can be physical battles, but it can also be mental health
Mhm.
battles. Mm.
That's really good. I remember when I was in my late teens, so the late 90s, and I'd had a really amazing encounter with the Holy Spirit when I was 16. So that's when I really started to kind of move into more kind of Pentecostal spaces in the church. And because I know this podcast is listened by many different denominations, but that's my journey. Um, and there was this, and I don't know if it had been before that or if this was a new thing, but in the late 90s, a lot of people were wearing like t-shirts that said, "Too blessed to be stressed." And it
Okay.
was, and this kind of really stuck with me. And so my daughter was born in my early 20s, and I carried this "too blessed to be stressed" little mantra was quite memorable. And anytime I was stressed, I'd feel like I was sinning. And it actually brought this kind of condemnation. And then through studying the Bible and seeing, actually, when Jesus was in Gethsemane and he was sweating drops of blood, that's a stress response.
Oh, yes, big time is one of the biggest stress responses that we can have. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I thought, oh, Jesus was actually that was in the Garden of this Gethsemane, he was chronically stressed by
Yeah.
what he was feeling. He was not too blessed to be stressed in the Garden of
He was
Gethsemane.
terrified. He was terrified of dying.
Yeah, and it really brought a lot of liberation and freedom because I'd been carrying this condemnation of um that this is a silly little thing that people are throwing around, not really thinking what it actually meant. So I think what you're saying about church experience is so good, and I think you're right. There has been a lot of progress within churches
I
and
see,
talking
yeah,
about.
I see that in a lot of congregations, and I'm really hopeful about that. And I think, um, yeah, of course, we want Jesus to be the center of everything, but I think mental health needs to be. We need to have a conversation around it,
Mhm,
and then we can also ask, what is Jesus saying about this?
mhm, mhm.
Um, and I'm also thinking, you said too blessed to be stressed. I'm wondering if we could make it, I'm blessed and I'm stressed
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, so they can actually live close to each other. I'm both. I'm really blessed, and I can see that. But when I'm really stressed, maybe I don't see it so much, and it's not either or, but it's and.
Yeah.
That takes away a lot of the, at least for a lot of my clients, I'm noticing that takes away a lot of the shame.
Mhm, mhm.
It's like, yes, I can be stressed, but I'm also, maybe not even but and I'm also a blessed person.
Absolutely. I also heard on another podcast, I think it was in the 24/7 prayer kind of space, and they were talking about the idea of mental health and it's an opportunity for the church to really be salt and light and to as particularly for evangelism and to the world where there's such a mental health crisis that if as a church we can really get this right and be equipped, and I know what with things that you're doing with the Flow Collective, we can take that and into the world as an answer and a real help for people in crisis.
Yeah, just knowing that it's not, the mental health field against the church, but it's actually, well, emotional and mental well-being is part of what God wants for us, what God
Yeah,
wants for his people. He doesn't want them to be triggered all the time. He doesn't want them, and often I just need to look at my own life, when I'm not dealing with my stuff, sadly my family is getting the brunt of it. And I think realizing that if we work on our own stuff, actually we're blessing our families
yeah,
because we're aware of our stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that was a huge motivator for me to work on my things, because I
Mhm.
realized, I want this to end here. I don't want to pass
Mhm.
it on to my kids, and I don't want my kids to suffer because I'm resentment is leaking out.
Yeah,
Yeah, for example.
absolutely. Which brings us nicely into our next point, particularly as parents and mothers and as wives. Um, as women, we're prone to neglecting our mental health because there's so many other demands upon our time. What are warning signs that women particularly should be heeding?
So I think resentment is a big one. So I think maybe we're not at the stage where we're depressed yet, but we have a sense of I'm alone in this. So, a lot of mums I work with would say, I'm not getting the support I need. I feel lonely.
Mhm.
My partner maybe doesn't understand me or doesn't help as much as I would. But also to have this mindset of actually, I need to be the one who's holding the family together. And again, don't get me wrong, I see myself as a nurturer, and I think that's a really important role that we have as mums to nurture our children, to be there for them. And part of that means that we are self-sacrificial. It's really important. An important part of what I see as my role is like I want to follow Jesus in the mundane, and that is partly following him by serving my kids and my husband.
Mhm.
But I think if it gets to a point where I don't feel loved and appreciated and I feel resentful, my family is definitely going to feel that.
Yeah.
So if I start accusing my kids, for example, or if I start accusing my husband, these are warning signs that actually I need something that I'm not expressing here.
Mhm. Mhm.
If I'm just pushing myself through life and just drag my feet behind me, and in the early stages of having a family, I remember that is a normal thing. We have sleepless nights, we feel like a zombie in the morning.
Yeah.
If that continues, and if I still feel like a zombie after my youngest child is 7 maybe, then something, probably I need to look at what's happening here, and am I
Mhm.
maybe not nurturing myself, or I'm not being nurtured the way I would need, but I continue to have this mindset of no, I just need to keep this going. And without me, the whole system is going to break apart. And I think I'm really important as a mum in the system. But if everything depends on me being so sacrificial that my own needs are not met, I'm going to feel that mentally and emotionally.
Mhm.
And a lot of women I work with are depressed because feel they have no agency. There's nothing they enjoy about life. It's all about them. There's nothing, and I think it shouldn't be me against them, but it should be really okay. We all have needs in the family, and yes, if I want a holiday in the Bahamas, it's probably not going to happen. But we have needs, and how can we make sure that mum's needs are met, and dad's needs are met, and the kids' needs are met? And we've been on a journey for the last 5 years as a family, realizing that I thought my needs couldn't be met, and now I know actually a lot of them can. If I'm in touch with my emotions, my needs, and if I can communicate it, and my husband is very willing to make sure that I get a little break, or that I get an evening out with a friend, or I probably thought I couldn't ask for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
I think often, yes, often it is. Some people really don't get enough support from their families. But what I'm noticing is if I know what I need, if I can start communicating that, not by blaming, I think that is a really bad way of doing it. But if I can learn to communicate what I need, then the likelihood is there that my husband is going to try and help me to have a think about how we can meet that need. And the same, of course, is also for him. He might need things,
Yeah.
and he needs to communicate that to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's our journey at the moment of learning that, not
Are
just
there
looking after the others, but also learning to ask for
mhm.
things. Yeah.
Are there particular practices that we can do on a regular basis to help us grow and maintain good mental health practices?
Yeah, so I think there's a whole lot. I think we could do a whole podcast on this, Emma, but I'll just give some kind of glimpses, and maybe there's space some other time to talk about this.
Yeah.
So I think one of the big things for me is to learn to see myself in a kind way. So I'm just thinking of this passage in Isaiah 40, verse 11, that has stayed with me since my kids were little, and it says, "He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart." That's for the kids, and now come the parents. He gently leads those who have young.
Yes.
And I think for me, I'm really feeling emotional right now talking about it. I think it's the gentleness that we often don't have.
Mhm.
And for me, my mum wasn't very gentle with herself, and I think I just thought I just need to get on with life. So for me, this passage has been, actually I can speak to myself in a gentle way because that's how God sees me. Yes, I'm on the road to sanctification. So there's some stuff I need to learn about. I need to repent of my sin. I need to learn to work with other people. I want to learn to love Him more. But there's a real appreciation and gentleness, not for what I do, but for who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm God's beloved child, and I am a mum. And I won't be the best mum, and my kids will have moments where maybe they are struggling with me, but I can be a good enough mum that can give them what they need so they can go out into the world and be who they're called to be. And I think being able to, and that's been a huge learning curve for me over the last 14 years since my first child was born, is, learn to talk to myself. Often
Mhm.
it's not stuff we say, but things we think about ourselves.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know if you have those moments where you think like, oh, not again, or oh, you did that badly, or kind
Mhm.
of this real black and white thinking is like, I'm a good mum or I'm a bad mum.
Mhm.
But actually learning to say, yes, there's some things I don't do well and I want to improve in them.
Mhm.
But Jesus loves me and He's on a path with me. And do I want to learn to think gently about myself
Mhm.
and about my kids? Because I'm realizing the gentler I am with myself, the less resentful I am, and the better I can love my husband and my kids, which for me has been a real secret. Things have improved since I've started to look kindly at myself.
Mhm.
So I think that's probably the practice, learning to speak to the inner critic that's trying to tell us that we're not good enough. Yes, as I said, we're on the road to sanctification. So some things we do really are harmful and maybe bad, but we're not. I've learned to look at myself and say, yeah, I think, yeah, you really need Jesus, Bella, at the moment. Have you spoken to Him today, for example? Or I think you need a break. Why don't you sit outside in the garden with a cup of tea for 15 minutes? And I think all those good practices come out of how we are able to see ourselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
If Bella's this awful woman that doesn't deserve a break because she's not a good enough mum, she's not going to give herself the 15 minutes. She's not going to allow herself to have a walk with a friend or to go for a nice meal because no, she's not supposed to spend that money all on herself.
Mhm.
But if Bella can be the woman who um, looks at herself with gentle eyes and her family, then she can also be kind. And out of that comes hopefully whole, a host full of practices that will be kind. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes absolute sense. It's that voice of that maternal guilt voice that brings condemnation all the time. That you've not done enough, you're not good enough, if you work a bit harder, you've not sold into your children enough, and just it builds up all bit by bit by bit until you're cutting, from what you said earlier, well, that kind of burden of responsibility that weighs heavy, and all these things kind of just encroach in as a very toxic, um, kind of almost poison in our minds that just weigh us down. But say if you're seeing that, changing the way we're perceiving ourselves, because we would never look at somebody else and sit and judge them in the way that we judge ourselves. And
No, I'm really, really a lot harsher
yeah,
with ourselves than we would be with somebody else. Let me get a tissue for a moment, Emma. One
okay.
second. This kind of, I need to care for myself.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that is for me, and I think especially in the church where we are learning to be self-sacrificial and to be kind, and those are really high values for me and in my family. But what I've learned is to put alongside, I'm here for you, I'm the nurturer here. I'm really giving my best. I'm also looking at how sustainable is it to nurture others when I'm not getting nurtured myself. And that is, talk about it spiritually, it talks about rest, it talks about the food I put into my body, it talks about, do I allow myself to surround myself with beauty? And for me that means sometimes going to Aldi's and getting a £5 bunch of flowers to put on my
Yeah.
table.
Yeah.
And it creates something that's really beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I read a book by Sarah Clarkson. I've read it a couple of times actually, and it's all about, I can't remember the name of it. And it's all about the power of beauty to bring healing
Yeah.
to those broken places in our lives, and how God uses beauty as a profound tool to minister to our brokenness. And
Yeah, and from what I know, I've read a lot of Sally's books,
yeah,
and there's a few books that Sally and Sarah have written together. There's that's part of their ministry. It's saying,
mhm,
life as family can be beautiful, and we can bring, and also, you and I are both home educators, and they were actually a huge inspiration for me
mhm,
to actually dare to take the leap to go into home education,
yeah,
because it shows like, this life can be a good life that we have as home educators. And I think, we haven't looked at that aspect yet, but I think there's an extra burden for home educators of, we need to get everything right. And on top of that, we're responsible for our kids' education. And if we get it wrong, there's this critic telling me it's not as loud anymore, but like, if you fail, your kids are gonna fail.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's again this black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. And I think if we can spot that tendency to either it's going to go perfect or it's going to go badly wrong, I think we have a good chance to actually have a good life,
mhm,
um, with our kids, with our partners, with God. Um, and yes, we're going to stumble, but we can get up again because we don't have to be perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
You've touched on it already, but this whole idea that as wives and mothers, we're not living our lives in isolation, and our relationships, particularly with our spouse, is going to have a large impact on our mental health. You spoke briefly at the Arise conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that you said was that you love working with couples. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my journey to working with couples was, I qualified 8 years ago as a counselor and started working for different agencies, and now we run our own practice, my husband and I. He's currently training as a coach, and I do the counseling side of things. But I was noticing really early on in my work with clients that about 50% of my clients came with relationship stuff, and it was usually with their spouses. Yeah. And a lot of my clients are Christians, so the faith element is always in the room. It's like, oh, I want to be a good wife, I want to be a good husband, but at the same time, maybe seeing my spouse as, oh, this person's the problem, and they're making life hard for me. Some people came saying I'm making life hard for my spouse. So this idea of,
Mhm,
what I see in the counseling room, 50% of what I see is I struggle in relationships. And, I was really passionate about marriage and relationships before then. My husband and I have been married for 17 years now. And over the years, we did some, I call it marriage MOT. So, we would, there was a couple in Austria where we lived at the time that offered courses for churches, and the churches would make sure that there was a crash and the parents could just, just be away from the kids for 3 or 4 hours and really work on their relationships. And I thought, wow, that was such an oasis for me to be able to be real. I didn't have to discuss my marriage if I didn't want to, but I could bring something in the bigger group. We got some input, and it felt like, oh, actually, I'm going out into the world, and we want to make this marriage work. We want this to be successful. Oh, well, successful is not a good word, probably. We want this to be a really positive relationship. And I believe God intended marriage to be something beautiful. When we
mhm,
look at Jesus and his bride,
yeah,
he obviously thinks that marriage can be something amazing. Otherwise, he wouldn't use it to talk
mhm,
about himself. So 3 years ago, I came to the point where I thought, actually, that's what I want to focus on in my work. I want to support couples to have thriving marriages. And I believe that has a huge influence on the church. A lot of people I work with are also in congregations. And what I see is when their marriage improves, people, onlookers, and often that are people from the church, their home groups, their friendship groups, start saying, oh, what have you changed? Things are different with you.
mhm,
And people say, oh, I've started coaching other people, which for me is, that's exactly what I want to see. I believe that if we understand some things about how God sees marriage and have some practical tools we can work with to understand relationships. And I trained in a model called the Gottman model, and that is a very practical, science-based model, but
Mhm.
we're marrying this with Christian principles. My husband and I spent 3 years at the Fifth Mission Bible College and learned to do exegesis and learned how to work with scripture.
Mhm.
And I think that's our unique selling point. We're trying to offer something that's science-based, and at the same time, sometimes that's really deeply rooted in scripture and in a Christian worldview.
Which is
Yeah.
really good because I think a lot of Christians are wary of not just marriage counselling, but counselling in general,
Yeah.
where it is not faith-based because they're worried about they just what are they going to be told? And so the fact that everything is rooted and grounded in faith and in the Word of God, but is also deeply practical is I think so needed in the wider church. It's wonderful. One of the things you said at the conference that I almost I wanted to stop and just focus on this comment was that you said that typically when a couple has problems, those problems had started 6 years before they come to that point where they reach
Yeah.
out for help.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about that? What are those early warning signs that that should not be ignored?
Yeah, so working with the Gottman method, I use a lot of vocabulary that comes from this method, and
Mhm.
I'll just briefly explain a few concepts that I think are really helpful. Um, so they talk about the so-called four horsemen of the apocalypse. I don't know, so not in the biblical sense, but there are four tendencies. So this couple, just want to say a few words. They've done relationship research for the last 40 years, and originally not with the intention of working with couples, but of just doing research.
Mhm.
So they started off with researchers, John Gottman, and then later his wife joined him. And his wife said, "Are you going to do anything with what you've discovered about marriages? Because now you've worked with thousands of people, you have data galore. Are you actually going to do something with that?" And he first was quite resistant to it, actually. But his wife was a clinical psychologist, and she said, "This is such a wealth of knowledge that we can if we bring this to the world, people can revolutionize their relationships. If they know some of the things that lead to divorce, they can learn some tools to stay together and to be happier than they were before, for example." And so he quite begrudgingly at the beginning came on board with that, but then quickly realized actually it is making a difference to the world to know some things about that. And he calls it the mathematics of relationships. So I'm not into mathematics, but the way so he was a mathematician before he became a psychologist, and he says, there's some things, some hard and fast facts about marriage that we can take from our research that can help any couple.
Mhm.
And one of the things they found out about were four destructive interaction patterns that they realized couples that came into their lab. So couples would come in for a day, 24 hours, and just talk to each other, and they would be recorded, and blood samples and urine samples would be taken, and they would just really watch closely how people were interacting. And then they would follow them for 7 years
Wow.
and realize that the couples who had used those four destructive patterns, and I'd like to share a little bit about what they are, had a very high chance of getting divorced within those 7 years.
Wow.
And to the point where they got to a point where they could predict with 94% accuracy if this
Wow.
couple would stay together or not, which I think is amazing. They wouldn't say you're going to get divorced, but they would watch this couple realizing that, yeah, that's another couple, the horsemen. So I just talk about them quickly. First one is criticism. So it's blaming my partner, telling them what they do wrong. Secondly, defensiveness. That is either being the innocent victim, like, oh, you're so mean to me, or it is like, oh, you tell me what I do wrong. Now listen what I have to tell you. So it's this mechanism of I'm feeling blamed and accused, and now I'm getting back at you
Mhm.
with a cannonball, basically. Yeah. Or it can be like, oh, you're so mean to me, I'm the victim.
Mhm.
So criticism and defensiveness, and they come, if one partner criticizes and the other partner doesn't know about the mathematics, they will very, very quickly become defensive.
Mhm.
And often in the science, it shows that very often it's the wife being the critical one, so in 80% of the cases. And very often the husband becoming defensive, and then it becomes like a ping pong match. Yeah, it's like I blame, you get defensive, you blame, I get defensive, and so it goes.
Yep.
And the worst horseman is contempt. So that is, showing my partner that I think badly of them, that I think I'm better than them. I roll my eyes at them. I think, oh, they're so useless. So all of this can be summed up as contempt. And contempt, Joe Gottman says, is the battery acid of the relationship. So if you want to poison your marriage, contempt is the best way of doing it. And the research, I think, is really, it shows it destroys the immune system. Even years afterwards, people who experience contempt have weaker immune systems and get more infections. So
The person who is being contemptuous or the person who's being shown contempt?
So the person who's being shown contempt has the most kind of consequences, but the person who is contemptuous will also see consequences. So that was one of the findings.
Wow.
It's really bad to be shown contempt, but if you are the one showing contempt, you can't be in a good place. So that also affects you. And often then both partners show contempt to each other. Yeah.
So this is showing signs in a physiological way within the body
Yeah.
years after.
Oh yeah. So I
That
think
is
they looked
phenomenal.
at 15 minutes of contempt in the lab
Mhm.
would lead to at least a year of more infectious diseases afterwards.
Oh my, that is
Hmm.
that's
Yeah, I was
really
just,
mind-blowing.
yeah. So I think knowing that and knowing, contempt can show itself in small ways. So eye rolling is one of the kind of ways of doing that. And there, yeah, there's research that, all, all people groups in the world do this. So this seems to be a general universal feature that we roll our eyes when we are feeling contemptuous.
Mhm.
So, and there's another one. It's like a little dimple on the left-hand side of our
Yeah.
mouth. It's like it's a little smirk, but
Yeah.
it only shows up, and we don't do it deliberately. But
Mhm.
there are ways in which our body is showing, like, I don't want to be with you. I think you're stupid. I think I'm better than you are, and this alone can lead to, yeah, to problems with our immune system. So I think that's one of the missions that, you know, that I see for the Flow Collective is to communicate. Okay, for each horseman, and I've spoken about three so far:
Yep.
criticism, defensiveness, contempt. The fourth one is stonewalling, and stonewalling means I'm ignoring the other person, but not because I want to be mean, but because I'm so physiologically aroused in a negative sense that I'm so overwhelmed that what I do is I'm shutting down. I'm trying to keep myself calm,
Mhm.
but actually what it does, it is communicates to my spouse, I'm not interested in you, I don't care about you, what you have to say doesn't matter. And the research shows, where women tend to be the ones who start in a harsh way the conversations, stonewallers are mainly men.
Mhm. Could
And
that be a defense mechanism?
it is a defense mechanism, but it's one that would, women also stonewall.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But men tend to stonewall more. And what the research says, it might have to do with um, male physiology, do you call it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with this fight or flight, women seem to tend, which I was really surprised about, but tend to be more resilient in conflict situations.
Mhm.
And for me, I didn't see myself as a very resilient person before I started training as a counselor. But I'm noticing that, working with couples, often the guys say, when she criticizes me, I just can't take it. It's too much. I need to get out of here because I get so angry. I'm either afraid I'm going to hurt her, say something bad, or I'm afraid that she's going to shred me to pieces.
Mhm. Mhm.
So understanding that dynamics, and I think if we know about the horsemen, we can start. So they are big warning signs. Um, and another warning sign is if our friendship isn't, if we don't feel close enough anymore, if we don't enjoy our partner's company, if there's no humor left, or we use humor in a contemptuous way, it's maybe I've stopped telling my spouse about the things that really matter to me because I'm afraid of getting hurt. And that again, we're companions in the marriage, but we also lovers, hopefully.
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons why we've chosen our spouses. And I think sex doesn't get talked about very much again in the church, but this is a very exclusive way of a husband and wife showing each other love.
Mhm.
And if we are companions and the companionship is already bad, very often, so most couples I see that come with relation problems in the companionship say actually our love life is either non-existent or we don't enjoy it anymore.
Mhm.
I think understanding the two are related. If we're not great friends, probably that part of our marriage is also going to go downhill. And both need attention. If
Mhm.
we just invest in the friendship system, but we don't feel attracted to our partner anymore, that's going to have the relationship is going to take a hit because we're not just friends. We're
Mhm.
more than that.
Mhm. That's really so rich and just yeah, it was mind blowing the complexity and how, but the domino effect. One of the interesting things, not so much for that I've seen for the whole idea with males. I've
Mm-hmm.
got 5 sons. No, I've got 4 sons. That's counted. 4 sons, and when my youngest is only very little, but my big boys they're turning into men, and raising these 3 young men. Um, I really was shocked as a mother seeing I found my daughter far more resilient. Like she was a very feminine little girl and she's lovely, but just the contrast between my daughter, who's the eldest, and these 3 boys who are rough and tumble. They were boyish boys. They liked to roughhouse play. So they had the exterior look of being quite robust, but emotionally, I felt significantly they were more fragile than my daughter. So that what you say about husbands being in that defensive situation, being the ones that are the women being a bit more emotionally robust, that I can totally understand that. I think that is something we don't understand as a difference between men and women.
And we talk about tendencies here. Of course, there are some,
Yeah.
I'm married to an extremely emotionally resilient guy who's
Mhm.
gentle and resilient, a lot more resilient than me.
Mhm.
So it also has to do with our stories.
Yeah.
But the tendency is for women to deal better with conflict and with difficult topics. And that's why often the wife would bring up the difficult stuff, but bring it up in a way that is harsh and that is not helpful. So that's one of the tools that I work with on my couples with my couples. So either in the counseling room or sometimes couples come in for a workshop. Not every couple comes every week. Some people come a few times, and we also offer workshops to churches. So this idea of let's learn some tools to have communication in a way that is constructive and loving and in the best, if we can't show great affection, at least neutral and fair towards our partner. Because if we blame them, and I'm just thinking about this, what Henry Ford, I think, said, if we do what we've always done, we're something like we'll get what we always got.
Yeah.
A bit like what Einstein said about insanity. And what was it? Kind of the definition of
Oh,
insanity is kind of doing the same things over and over again and
and
expecting
expecting to get different
results.
results. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that is also one of the couples that come into our practice. I need to see 2 things. So I have hope that things are going to change for them. Firstly, I need to see that there's still some kind of love, some kind of at least a memory of that we had good times together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe there's so much resentment and sadness on top of that memory that it's really hard to think I still love my husband and my wife.
Mhm.
But, when I do kind of an initial assessment phase with a couple, I'm excited when I see that one partner starts crying and says, oh, I wish we still had that. Or one partner says, oh, we had such good times together and things are tough now. That
Mhm.
is really good news because it shows that there is still love.
Mhm.
It's really hard. And there is a point of no return, John Gottman says, when we're so kind of cold on the inside towards our spouses that the fire is completely has gone out. And sadly, I see that, some couples I've worked with have decided to get a divorce, and that's heartbreaking to see.
Yeah.
Um, so, just noticing
Mhm.
that there still needs to be some kind of love or a willingness to change. So if couples come in and just want to prove to their partner that it's not worth working on the relationship, that's not a good starting point for marriage counseling.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or I suppose I wonder if some people come in wanting to be proven right.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people want that. And I think that's why it's so important to have an initial conversation. And if that's what people want, if they want a referee or if they want to prove that it's not worth investing in this relationship, then we're not the right place.
Hmm.
So we want to work with couples who believe that, yes, there's still some love, and who believe that they can change things and that they can learn new skills to change the dynamics of their relationships. And bringing God into the picture, a lot of the couples we work with are Christians. It's like God is the third person in this marriage, and he has a real interest in us learning to be loving towards each other. And yeah, I've worked with several couples now where there's been some huge turnarounds, after apathy for a long time, or people feeling really emotionally or desperate about the relationship. If there's still love and people are willing to learn tools, there's a really good chance, even after affairs. I work with couples
Hmm.
after affairs. If the the person who committed the affair, or who had the affair, says, I take full responsibility for this. It was not okay what I did, and I want to work on the relationship. And the other person's still in. There's at
Hmm.
least 50% chance that the marriage can be
Wow,
rescued. So
that's wonderful.
yeah,
Obviously, anyone listening and recognizing actually, I see these signs, I see these things that are in my marriage, and that this isn't good, but they're not in crisis. Obviously, that is the point where they should be coming
yes,
and getting help.
yeah,
Don't wait till you're like ready to walk away. Getting that help at that point is absolutely key. But obviously, there'll be people listening to this, and they'll be like, they'll feel that their marriage is absolutely at crisis point. What
mm,
are the first steps that they could take to get help? Because obviously, a lot of people, to get help is actually quite a big step. They feel shame, they feel guilt, they feel fear. And what would you say?
and I often notice that in the dynamics of a relationship. So again, this is a tendency. What I notice is often the wife isn't happy with the relationship. Often the husband isn't either, but the wife would be the one bringing up and saying, we need to see a counselor.
Hmm.
Um, and often the husband then comes in but feels like she's dragging me into the room. So I need to have a conversation with the couple, and I need to say, this is what I'm offering. I'm not a referee. I'm not on the side of either you or your wife, but I want to be on the side of your relationship. Are you interested in somebody? And I like using the word coaching, because the Gottman method is a lot more coaching than therapy. Yeah. So this idea of how can we change dynamics in a way so we actually enjoy this.
Hmm.
Yeah. But going back to your question, I think the first point is realizing that it is a crisis. And I think often what I notice is one partner, and sometimes that's the wife, yeah, would say, no, we don't need help. We can do this by ourselves. The problem is, if one person is in crisis, the whole marriage is in crisis.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking of, there's the husband, there's the wife, and then there's the relationship.
Hmm.
But if one person is in crisis with the marriage, the whole marriage is in crisis. And I think understanding that, and I have a few, it's usually guys coming in saying, I don't see a problem in the relationship, but I love my wife and I'm willing to work on our stuff. And maybe I'll find out that there is some things that we could change.
Hmm.
And over time, what I often notice is actually they're also unhappy with some things, but just didn't know how to voice them.
Yeah.
So if there is a space where both partners feel accepted and feel that they are treated with respect, the guys also often come with stuff that they find hard, and often it's related to sex. Yeah, not always, but very often.
Yeah. Is
And
that
that's
because men often,
yeah,
that's where men feel loved, or
yeah. So what the Gottman saw in their research is the way they see it from the data is guys need sex to connect emotionally with their wives. So if I have good sex and I feel respected,
Mhm.
that means, and again, this is about tendencies, not black and white.
Yeah.
That means that I then want to invest in the relationship with my wife because, she's she's giving me what I need and I'm interested in her as a person. But often it starts with getting that physical need met.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the research says for women, it's often the other way around. So if I'm understood and loved by my husband, if he does the dishes in the evening, and if he makes sure I can meet my friends and go out for a coffee with my friends when I'm really exhausted, that makes my husband really attractive to me. And if they want to know who I am and really care about my thoughts and my feelings, the problem with that is if his needs aren't met
Cycle of,
and
and
hers
it
aren't
feels
met,
more spiral of, yeah.
becomes a spiral, and that is a real problem. And I think, the Gottmans would say you need to work on the friendship system first. But I'm now training as a sex therapist, and something I'm learning from a different model is actually both are important. And rather than saying this one's more important, we need to work on this first, that would only look after the woman's need.
Mm-hmm.
But the other need is also an important need that wants to be looked at. And as I said, we're not just companions. We
Yeah.
also love us, hopefully. And that is an area that needs to be developed and talked about. I think that is a big thing. A lot of couples don't talk about sex. They just do it or don't do it. But actually having language to speak
Mm-hmm.
about what we like, what we don't like, um, and how we feel loved by a partner in that way, I think requires skills. And I think people inside the church often have even fewer skills because there's so much taboo around sex.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there is amazing that, um, again, as Christians, these are things that we would recognize, well, they are true, but there's such a taboo about talking about sex and an embarrassment and the thought of going to a secular counselor, and maybe a secular counselor might be a sex therapist. That would be something that most Christians would be absolutely no way, and
But
probably
otherwise,
rightly so.
yeah.
Um, let's be honest. You can't imagine what a secular sex therapist might want to suggest. So a Christian able to speak into this and with a godly biblical framework is going to be of immense value to the church, and bring these things into the light which God created for our good, which has obviously been taken a lot by the world and has been corrupted. But that is yeah, that is really brilliant to hear that that's something you're being trained in, that you'll be able to bring in the future to
And it's an
the
important part
States.
of every love relationship. There is companionship, but there is also eroticism. That is a part of who we are. We
Mhm.
are sexual beings, and I think realizing that for ourselves, but then also thinking, how could that play out? And yeah, so
Would
that
you
is an important topic. Yeah.
Would you say you mentioned how in the marriage counselling you're more coaching?
Hmm.
And we also talked earlier when we talked about the mental health, about this idea of, particularly for women, we've talked about this idea that if we don't get our stuff dealt with, it spills over into our relationships with our husbands and our children. Would there be space then for, you've got the marriage counselling, but obviously the problems in the marriage could be as a result of
Yeah.
unresolved trauma or mental health problems with either the husband or the wife or with both, that within the marriage counselling that the individual could probably seek individual counselling for their own issues.
Yeah, and often what I see is, somebody comes with their stuff, and then they they say, actually, there's also something about our marriage. Or people come and say, oh yeah, things are getting better between us, but actually, and often this has to do with unresolved trauma. And I want
Mhm.
to use that word with care because it's thrown about a lot. But
Yeah.
I think, if I'm not securely attached, I believe attachment theory is really important when it comes to relationships. So if I didn't feel secure in the relationship with my primary caregivers, my parents, that has a huge impact on the way I live in my marriage reality.
Yeah.
And it will also have an impact on the way I treat my kids. So I
Mhm.
think knowing that, and I think that's where, so on our website, we talk about counseling or coaching, and we say to people, you don't have to decide straight away which one. If you want to come to make things better between you and want to enjoy a good life as a couple, great, then come and get some coaching. But if one of you realizes that actually there's some childhood stuff, then we can also integrate some elements of counseling in this process. So
Mhm.
either I can do it with the couple, and that can be very powerful. So the kind of partners telling each other about their family systems and sharing about their pain,
Mhm.
keeping in the room and navigating that. Or it is possible to just see one of us, and that would be me because I'm the counselor, to work on some of the individual things in your life. But that would mean that we need to really separate the relationship stuff from your stuff. So
Mhm.
it's a tightrope
Yeah.
walking act because both partners need to trust me,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's better to get somebody from outside
Yeah.
as a counselor because yeah, otherwise the trust can be compromised. I've seen it work with a few couples where there was a lot of trust, and we've really promised not to work on the relationship while the other partner wasn't there.
Mhm.
But I think, and that's why we're hoping to grow our team as a Flow
Mhm.
Collective to get a few other counselors in that then can do the counseling work with um, the individual spouses. Yeah.
That opens up the next question that so I think generally would you agree that women are more open to the idea of counselling than men? Again,
Uh,
that kind of general idea.
Very often it would be in the relationship would be the wife or the female partner saying we need to do something. But I've also had guys who came to the counseling saying, my marriage is about to break apart. I don't really know how to deal with feelings. That isn't quite my thing. My wife is really suffering, but she doesn't want to come. She said, you need to sort
Mm.
yourself out.
Yeah.
So what I would say is if both of you are willing to work in the relationship, please come together because we have a much higher chance to work on your relationship. But I've worked with plenty of people in the meantime where one partner came in and we've still been able to achieve something. So, I'm thinking of one person I worked with where the person felt really distant from their partner, and again, the sex life was really compromised. And we started working on around defensiveness and around criticism, and we realized that when he was able to give his wife what she needed on an emotional level, she then found him a lot more attractive.
Mm.
And so things shifted, and that's not just one example. I've seen a few, no, more than a few in the meantime, of if I take responsibility for my stuff and I decide that I'm not going to use the horseman anymore, that I'm not going to be defensive, that I'm going to work on the friendship, even if my partner's not willing to participate in any of the official tools.
Mhm.
If I change position, the relationship is going to change position. And just one thing to say here, if there's abuse in the relationship, then that is a different kettle of fish. It's a
Yeah.
different story. Because if one partner is coercive, controlling, humiliates the other partner, and it's clear that there is a perpetrator and a victim, I would never do marriage counseling because
Mhm.
it keeps the victim in a space of
Mhm.
being harassed and controlled. Um, and I would only work with the victim and not with the perpetrator. I know there's counselors who do that kind of work, but yeah, we as an organization have decided to side with the person that is experiencing the abuse. So we're not offering marriage counseling because otherwise we are perpetuating the cycles of abuse.
Have you had instances where you've had marriage counselling and it's become clear in the process that actually this is an abusive relationship?
So the assessment we do is very thorough. So
Mhm.
in the assessment, it will flag up if the partner, both partners fill in something that's sent off to the Gottman Institute, and we get lots of data back. Um, Sometimes it's not quite sure, and then I need to suss out, okay, are you experiencing? I have a individual conversation with both partners before we begin the process. And sometimes people said no, but then as we were working and what people talked about, it became clearer that one person clearly wasn't willing to change or had controlling behavior towards their partner or humiliated them all the time.
Mhm.
And I've had situations where I've said, or sometimes there's such deep trauma that people are not able to connect with their partner and they would need to do some individual work before the couples work can actually. Yes, but I stopped processes because I realized that I would be supporting the
Mhm.
person who is keeping the other person under control in a very negative way. And I believe in marriage. I believe marriages should be rescued, but when there's abuse present, we need to be very careful.
Mhm.
I also work with people who've lost loved ones because they completed suicide because they didn't see a way out. Yeah,
Wow.
so
Mhm.
that's also part of the picture,
Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah. Um, what the work you do the couple work, but you're also working with churches, and we know that healthy marriages lead to healthy families, which lead to build healthy churches. How can the wider church nurture strong marriages?
So I think we've spoken a little bit about what happens when we don't speak about mental health
Mhm.
in the church, and I think the same is true for marriage. I think we need to talk about marriage in the church, and if the leader or if the leaders of the church is married, I think that is a really good opportunity to actually talk about the importance of marriage. But it's not so important what we say; it's a lot more important what we do. So, and the same is true for kids. So, if I tell my kids to pick up their clothes on my own, there's a pile in my corner. Actually, my words won't be heard because my actions are a lot louder.
Yeah.
So, I think the encouragement is church leaders have great relationships
Mhm.
because that's going to be so inspiring for your congregation
Mhm.
and also be vulnerable to some extent. I think we need to be careful about what we share, of course, about the fact that married life isn't always plain sailing. And
Mhm.
that, we have phases where things are difficult or where there are temptations or where, yeah, we're overwhelmed or where we need support. And I think if church leaders can mirror some of that to their congregation, it's like, marriage is really important to me, but my wife and I or my husband and I are really invested in each other and in this relationship. Um, if we're not, then probably people are going to learn that from us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's an important one. And then I think, I had a conversation with my husband in the run up to this interview, and he said, "Isn't it strange how we have groups for kids, we have groups for teens, we have groups for toddlers, we have groups for, yeah, we have groups for, I don't know, for young mums.
Babies and
But,
yeah.
where are the groups for couples? Where is this lobby, the support network for marriages? And if we really believe that healthy marriages, healthy churches,
Mhm.
that should be should be a focus in our work as a church.
Yeah.
How can we support married couples
Mhm.
and people who want to get married?
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So I think that was a really good. It's not that's I pinched that from Roman, but I think he's right about that. Yeah. This
It
idea.
is.
Yeah.
If you've got the healthy marriages, then a lot of other problems are dealt with. You're not mopping up a lot of mess that falls out from families having unhealthy marriages. It's like kind of looking at the root of some problems that would spill out into the wider church and nurturing that root and not just dealing with the fruit of something that's not healthy.
And, I remember when we were praying for the vision of kind of our business. I think I don't see pictures very often. I'm not a very visual person, but as I was praying, I had this image in my mind of lots of little circles, and those were marriages. So husband and a wife, and then the kids in the middle, and a light coming from
Mhm.
which was God. That's how I interpreted it from each of those cycles. But what was happening is, the kids were standing in the light because of what was going on. And not just the kids, but it spread to kind of, there were more circles and more circles. And I could see kind of the light moving from one part of the image to the other, like a wildfire,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And I think that is really my vision. And I couldn't have put it into or our vision as the Flow Collective is if we can strengthen marriages and families, and that's where Roman is training as a systemic family coach at the moment. So we also want to work with families because we believe that it's not just about the relationship between the parents; it's also between parents and kids. But that's yeah, in a year's time we can talk about this. At the moment, we're
And
focusing on
it's
that.
so important because I think there's a real lack of family ministry within the
Mm,
wider church as
yeah.
well.
So I think we want to really truly support families, but for us, this starts with supporting the parents
Yeah.
and their relationship, and out of that, hopefully. So in this picture, what I really like is, it's not starting on one end, going to the other end, but it's starting from within the cycles, from within those parent kind of
Mhm.
connected parents who love their children well and who have Jesus in their lives.
Mhm.
Um, and then it's like a ripple effect, and
Yeah.
it will transform churches. I truly
Mhm.
believe that. Yeah.
Absolutely. You and your husband, you've touched on the fact that you're working with churches.
Mm.
Are you running courses now, or is that something in the future?
So we've just so I did training years ago, and we've got the setup now to run courses. So we haven't run courses before, but we're ready to do it as soon as the first church says that. That's both my husband and I are speakers, so we have the experience also of leading groups, and we have worked within church ministry for the last 5 years. So we bring the skills of working within a church setting, and at the same time bringing in the knowledge that we have from the counselling room and the coaching.
What do you do in those what do you offer churches in the courses that you have?
Yeah, so the course is based on a course by John Gottman called, and I did some training for that officially. It's called 7 Principles to Make Marriage Work, and that's a 12-hour course for couples. And the way we're thinking is we could offer like 2 6-hour blocks, or we could offer 3 4-hour blocks, and we would do in-house training. So we would come to the church and say, you have the people, you have the facilities, and we would run the course for you. But rather than just having it be a science-based course, we would then marry the content with a Christian worldview, and we would also bring scripture and start with looking at how does God see relationships. So that would be one of the threads that would lead through the course, is how does God see relationship, to make sure that we're grounded in how his it's relationships are his idea and his design.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the idea is, if churches want to book the 12-hour course, that would cover all the principles that John Gottman has researched in a nutshell, and would give couples the tools they need for nurturing their friendship, nurturing intimacy, doing conflict well,
Mhm.
dreaming together, building trust. So all the parts of what we call a marital house
Mhm.
are looked at, quite briefly. And I think one thing couples are scared about, and I've heard that from church leaders saying, "Oh, our couples don't want to share about their stuff."
Yeah.
And the way it's set up, nobody has to share anything with anybody else in the group.
Mhm.
So the way it's set up is you get some input. So it's probably going to be mainly me bringing kind of the psychological input, and then Roman bringing some theological input, and then the couples go off to do an exercise by themselves on a walk or in a corner of the room, and then whoever wants to bring something can, but nobody's forced to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and then we'd like to offer a shorter version, which of course means we can't teach all the 7 principles, or much shorter, like a 6-hour course. And then there's also the option for booking us for a church service to speak, or to book us for a 2 to 3 hour workshop, just to get some of the basics. Or maybe there's a topic like, I don't know, wanting to talk about sex, or wanting to talk about um, marriage preparation, or if there is a particular topic that churches are interested in, that's also an
Mhm.
option to approach us and to say, would you talk about this
Yeah.
in church? Anything that's related to relationships. Yeah.
That sounds really rich and so helpful. If any churches or leaders, pastors want more information, they can find it on your website.
Yeah, they can find that on our website. So we have a new website now, and newflowforcouples.co.uk, but
And I will link that in the description and in the show notes as
yeah.
well, so people can access that.
Yeah, so what we would like to do is we'd like to offer the courses, and the vision for that is don't need to get to crisis point.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
can catch it earlier, and couples who are already really struggling are not the right couples for this group
Yeah,
setting. They really need counseling or coaching.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, we'd like to be a port of call for churches where church leaders say, oh, actually, I have this couple. I'm trying to support them. We're trying to support them as a community, but this isn't working out. Who can I contact about this?
Hmm.
Or maybe there is something that a church leader thinks, oh, could this be abuse? I don't really know. So we call it co-care or consultations for church leaders. So that would also be, you
Hmm.
know, kind of getting some input from people who work with relationships. It's like, should I? And the church leader needs to make up his or her mind about this. But maybe there is some input from the outside about, is this getting dangerous for one of the partners, for example? Yeah.
And that's brilliant, because I don't think every denomination is obviously different. They train their pastors, their ministers in different ways, and so not every church minister is actually adequately equipped to deal with some of these much more complex issues. And again, what you said about recognizing abuse, because we know that abusers can be charming
Yeah, oh yes.
and
Mhm. Actually,
they're often the people that you would least expect to be abusers, and therefore church leaders being a wife coming and saying this is what's happening in the home, that can be a shock. And that having somebody outside that situation to come in and say, actually, no, this is wrong, this is abuse, is really helpful.
and I think also to realize, and again, as church leaders, I think often, when we trained with lots of people who have become church leaders, and I think there is a stigma around we need to know everything about everything.
Yeah.
And actually, by bringing us into the picture or somebody else who's doing something similar, it's saying actually, my expertise is pastoral work and theological work.
Hmm.
But I'm bringing somebody in who can maybe cover some ground that I'm not an expert in, but I want to work with them.
Yeah.
I think that's what we would like to offer. We'd like to offer partnership with churches to say, this is what we're offering. We'd like to support your couples.
Hmm.
That's our heart.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Bella. This has been such a really rich and interesting conversation. I've learned a lot. And I'm going to put in the description how you can contact Bella and connect with her. You offer online and in person
Mm-hmm.
sessions.
Yeah, so both sessions and also the courses we are thinking of offering both, because especially for young parents, I think it's sometimes quite hard. And I think also for churches to say maybe churches could offer a crash, or could offer kind of to help funding some of those sessions, especially for younger families. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I think there are ways for churches to say actually we're creating an environment that is marriage friendly, not just family friendly.
Yeah, and that's also creative of how can churches support family, because obviously these things cost money,
Yeah.
and being able to say, actually, we recognize that there's help needed, financially supporting, coaching and counselling, so that families can get the help that they need, even if they can't afford it in their own particular circumstances, is a beautiful thing. So just encouraging church leaders to think out of the box about how to support families.
Also with groups, it's a lot more cost effective. We kind of the 12-hour course costs about as much as two counseling sessions. So really, you get a lot more out of it if you're not at crisis point, but you say, actually, we would like an MOT or
Mhm.
like a service for our marriage, like a car service. Then that is a very cost efficient way of actually working with your marriage. And yeah, so my husband and I have done this a few times, and
Mm.
we're going to continue nurturing our marriage. It's
Yeah.
really important. And I believe that actually in this way, we're also going to strengthen our families, and eventually we're going to serve our churches better.
Which is a really important thing to finish on, that
Yeah.
even if you like got a good marriage, that constant working, and just in the same way you service your car, you MOT your car, not thinking you've arrived. And yeah, that even any couple can benefit from the course and grow and nurture.
And put constant practices into, we have a practice every week. We have something we call a marriage meeting where we talk about the things that have been good and the things that we would like from each other. Some weeks we skip it because of the life circumstances, but we keep coming back to it, saying, no, we need to continue doing that. Especially if we work with couples, we need to know what we believe in and what we think, and habits are really, really important. Yeah.
Do you know something that you don't know if I share this, but this really spoke to me. So a few weeks ago, we were at a barbecue, and your husband had arrived first,
Mm.
and I kind of arrived, I think, around about the same time as your husband arrived, and you came after. And I watched you welcoming, or your husband welcoming you in your meeting, and it was absolutely beautiful. The way that you both looked at each other, you connected with each other. You'd only been away in the morning, you'd been doing different church
Only
things,
half day. Yeah.
half day, and you absolutely, completely concentrated on each other. You showed each other affection in front of the whole, not and show to the whole room. It was your
Yeah.
own little private thing, but anyone could see it. Your kids were there. They could see this interaction between you, which I think was probably just your normal way of greeting each other.
Yeah, and that's
And it
something we've
was,
learned. We've learned with those tools. We're actually,
oh,
that is one of the tools, is greet your spouses if you hadn't seen them in ages.
and it was it. I
Mm-hmm.
watched it and I'm like, wow, I have never seen couples like good, like I'm not talking, does any couple greet each other in such a beautiful way when they've only been apart for a
Yeah,
few hours. And it
everybody can
really
learn that.
impacted me. I
Yeah.
thought it was so lovely to watch. And so yeah, so this
Thanks for feedbacking that. Yeah, and I think it's something we don't think about anymore because we just do it.
mhm.
We do it at home. We do it when we meet each other. When one person's at work, the other person would usually try and go down to the train station, and we have those kind of reunion moments, and those are really precious, and they build our relationship.
And it
Uh,
made I was when I was sitting there watching, one of the things that really impacted me was like the impact that's having on your children. The impact that's having on your daughter, seeing actually this is how me as a young woman should be expected to be treated by my future husband. And your
yeah.
son, this is how I
Yeah.
should be treating my wife when I'm married. It was just so powerful. Very fleeting, very small, just but it really left an impact on me. It was lovely to watch.
Thanks for sharing, Emma. That means a lot.
So
Yeah.
thank you, Bella, so much for your time and for the wealth of information that you've shared with us. Anyone who's been impacted wants to reach out to Bella for either just their own mental health and their own just wanting to work through their own stuff, or if you want to connect with Flow Collective for marriage. Or if you're a pastor or church leader, please go to their website and all the information is there for how to get hold of Bella and Roman. Thank you so much.